Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Chris Wyatt Africa on the Indaba Africa channel. And once again, I'm joined. It's been a while. I think the last time we spoke was a year ago about the medium-term budget. And that was, of course, the leader, the president of the United Democratic Movement, none other, sorry, it's been a long day, than Major General Bantu Holomisa, who I think is probably pretty knackered. He's been busy out campaigning on the trail. General Holomisa, sir, it's a pleasure once again to welcome you back to the program. How are you doing?
Thank you, Chris, for inviting me to come and share some thoughts about our country in your channel. I'm looking forward to field your questions. Otherwise, I've been well, other than having a hectic schedule, that of campaigning.
Well, I can imagine a hectic schedule. I mean, I just recently myself ran for office. I don't know if I told you that, unsuccessfully. I lost in my primary bid, and I can attest that it's quite a taxing campaign to get out, knock on doors, rallying people, speaking to people. It takes a lot of energy. And for those who've never done it, they don't really understand just how taxing it can be. So thank you for your time tonight. We're just a couple weeks away from the election. We're going to talk about your manifesto and what UDM would like to accomplish. But before we get to that, do you believe, as many people believe, that this will be a momentous election, arguably the most important in the new dispensation since 1994, and that the ANC is likely to fall below 50% in Parliament? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, given the way they have mishandled the affairs of the state, and also that those who have been betting on a wicket of anti-corruption like us, and in the process promoting the ethics of good governance. And of course, we were vindicated by the Zondo Commission's Commission of Inquiry on State Capture. I think the doubting Thomases there will now have no excuse but to go out and vote and look for or search for an alternative. That's my wish. Otherwise, the last 30 years, we can say we have done some good things here and there, but mainly it was characterized by great reward and compensation. Hence, you will find that we have been even downgraded by a number of international institutions, citing the fact that there is no a rule of law, and also that the levels of corruption are being practiced at the highest level. So we hope that the voters of South Africa will go out on the 29th and say, never again shall we have a one-party state in South Africa, because it has proven to us that it breeds nothing but corruption.
Well, it is interesting you mentioned a one-party state, because under the National Party during the apartheid era, it was essentially a one-party state. Even though there are other political parties, they really had no political power. And in many respects, that's been the 30-year history with the ANC. In fact, even after one election, they had 69% of parliament, and they've steadily been whittled back down, this time likely to go below 50%. Tackling political corruption is a theme of your campaign and what you're hoping to accomplish to stop from happening in South Africa. As you've alluded to, the ANC, while many things have been accomplished that are positive, corruption really has permeated what's going on. I do find interesting that you reference the Zondo Commission, which seems to have dropped off the political radar with load shedding and water shedding and all the things taking place right now. Not many political parties have been mentioning this corruption, but it's something of paramount concern to the UDM.
It is paramount important to us, because if you see the destruction of our infrastructure, as well as the lack of maintaining standards, and also the fact that the institutions like a Public Service Commission, which have been charged to employ people to run government departments, you will find that that duty has been usurped by the ANC's headquarters, who have no clue about how a civil servant should work and behave, but they merely usurp the powers of the Public Service Commission. And as a result, the standard of administration has collapsed in this country. You can go to any office and ask them whether they have a filing system, let alone capturing the information. Because if you come back in 2 weeks' time, they will say, oh, we remember, sir, you were here last time, but let's check what happened. And that is the kind of administration we have. So if we want to deal with corruption, we will have to tell the people, as we are doing right now, that the fact that you have got bad roads, you've got no medication in hospital, that hospital's infrastructure is collapsing, and that the people are not employed according to employed on merit, is because of this corruption. And the fact that you have presidents who can bring foreign currency and put them in their suitcases and mattresses, that is corruption. The fact that you have the law enforcement agencies also being caught up in the tail, that's corruption. So we need to make sure that after election, we table that Zondo Commission of inquiries findings and then take some of the findings and start implementing to recapture the lost ground.
Well, if that's your hope and desire, then that clearly is a need to see the ANC no longer in government, because we've seen what the ANC does with their accused for corruption going way back. I mean, look at all the people accused of corruption here. Zandile Gumeda, 168 counts. She's finally on trial for that. Ace Magashule, the Vreda dairy scandal, the 253 million rand asbestos tender. That goes back many years. The arms scandal with Jacob Zuma. Zweli Mkhize with Digital Vibes, Oilgate, Travelgate, and Kandla, Pala Pala, as I call Cyril Ramaphosa, Munir Pala Pala. The ANC doesn't take corruption serious, and of course, Ramaphosa came to office in early 2018 promising to deal with corruption. And frankly, I think if we look at the level of corruption, it might be worse under this administration than even the Zondo Commission state capture era. So it sounds like the ANC needs to go if there's going to be a serious effort to go after people who've committed these crimes.
That is the wish of many in this country. But as you know, the running of the elections, especially if you are not in government, you don't have, you have got little chances of influencing sometimes the outcome. So if a rigging of election can be take place in countries like yours, what would stop it here? You remember Al Gore and Bush Jr., when the whole world was waiting for the results. But we are not talking about that today. So we hope that at least there will be sanity. Sanity will prevail from those who are running our elections. And remember that what Mandela has and others fought for, and what they had declared, Mandela's have never declared that the same ruling party today, the liberators of yesteryear, would be accused of stealing state resources.
Well, you know, it is interesting, and you live in the East, or I'm assuming you're from the Eastern Cape, and that is a province where the ANC reliably harvests lots of votes, and they have long considered it a safe province, despite the fact that UDM gets a bulk of its votes from there. So this is a province that has long been neglected. Now, before we went on air, I was choosing the background here, and I didn't have a picture of anywhere in the Eastern Cape. We were talking about the natural beauty, and the general was alluding to the neglect of the Eastern Cape. I'm not laughing about that, but just because we were discussing it. So this is a province that has long been neglected by the ANC, probably nearly as badly as any other province has been neglected. Are Eastern Cape voters paying attention to this? Are they actually going, wait a second, I'm 30 years and look at this. We have pit latrines in our primary schools and kids are dying, falling in feces, and feeding schemes in Nelson Mandela Bay are not getting food to kids. Is it time for a change? Is that frustration there? Because I know in KZN, it's there. Is it the case in Eastern Cape? Are people finally hotful of the ANC?
Oh, well, on paper and what we are hearing from them when we are campaigning and listening to radio talk shows, they have not minced their words. They are tired of the ruling party. And I hope that the other parties who are campaigning in this province will reduce their numbers drastically in parliament. Of course, the Eastern Cape, there is that sentimental attachment that the former leaders who were in the vanguard of the struggle come from this province, like namely O.R. Tambo, Governor Mbeki, Walter Sisulu, Nelson Mandela, Chris Hani, Steve Biko, and so on and so on. So there is that attachment to the theory of liberation, but the advantage we have is that the youth of today has got nothing to do with the past. They sometimes feel irritated if you focus mainly on telling them about how you struggle and so on. And they will ask you a question and say, did you struggle for us to be in this mess? And then you feel that that's a positive response from the youth. So I hope that the landscape after the elections will change a little bit, because the education in this part of the world, although we have never been lucky to be endowed with minerals, but the education has been a fountain for this province. So I hope that the people now are beginning to see that this is not what Mandela fought for and others.
Well, you touched on something very important there, General, and that is the fact that most people need to wake up and realize that the majority of South Africans were not alive before 94. They've been born since 94, the so-called born freeze. And as I've been saying for some time, at some point, the ANC trotting out and going to Heroes Acre and talking about the struggle and Mkonta Wisizwe and this, that, and the other, that begins to become a little bit patronizing and wearing on kids that never grew up with it. And it's not what they want to hear from grandmom and granddad. So now that applies to all political parties. So has that been a focus for the UDM? Are you looking at a younger generation? I did see one of the press reports and one of the newspapers, I won't mention which one, it said, well, maybe I might have been the Daily Maverick, saying that, well, it looks like it's time for Bantu Holomisa to hand over the reins for the UDM and step off the stage. I don't know that that's happening, and I'm not suggesting it. But what I'm saying is that, are you and the leadership of the UDM focusing on getting these younger voters out and getting the word out to the people who really don't care to hear the story about liberation?
We are doing very well on that score. Even the deputy president, currently Deputy President Ngabayom Zikwankwa, who is chief whip of the party in parliament, is young. And we have a secretary general who is 35 years old. Last year, he was writing his master's examination. And you have a string of other graduates who are young, who are councillors at local government level. And also the list of our members of parliament to the list to parliament is a mixed list of young women and elderly people. So yes, we are aware that the demographics of South Africa are changing when it comes to the age.
So the stronghold for the UDM is for long been primarily in the Eastern Cape. At the national level, do you have a feel for good outreach? Are you making progress elsewhere, maybe in Gauteng or even in KZN? What's it looking like for the UDM across the country for this election?
For this election, we have a national footprint, of course, because we've got structures in almost 8 provinces out of 9. We're not strong in Northern Cape. So we expect, therefore, that at least we will continue to get votes from other provinces, especially in Gauteng and Western Cape, as well as Northwest. Those provinces, I think, as I'm monitoring the reports and see pictures of posters and billboards all over, I think we are beginning to send a message. And also, our message resonates very well when we say corruption destroys our freedom. So it's perfect. It fits the time in South Africa.
Now, last year I was there. I covered the BRICS summit. That's a whole other topic altogether. But also I was there to cover the Multiparty Charter, the meeting that took place in a historic location, of course, where the CODESA, the Convention for Democratic South Africa, took place, Emperor's Palace in Kempton Park. Now, the MPC was a pre-election agreement amongst a group of parties, which has grown with some other parties have since joined them. But they're not polling high enough at the moment to get an outright majority. The UDM, unless I'm mistaken, did not sign up to the multi-party charter at that stage, and you are still not part of it unless I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, please correct me. After the election, the multi-party charter, if the ANC is pushed down far enough, will be seeking to form a coalition government. Would that be something that the UDM would consider going forward to help form a majority or a minority coalition?
The position of the UDM when it comes to coalition, based on the experience elsewhere in the world, is that we cannot put preconditions to say we will not work with so-and-so, we can work with so-and-so. It doesn't work like that in the politics of coalition. Even if you go to Germany today and see and look at the history there, you will find that the hardline socialists able to sit down around the table with the Christian Democrats and form a government. What is needed there is to immediately sit down and compare notes and see whether you cannot integrate, because that is the key. Integrate those manifestos so that would be a guiding Bible to satisfy and justify why you have taken the votes to go and partner with party X. So it's not going to be this big brother mentality we've been witnessing at local government. At national level, things are going to change. Fortunately, I was once part of a government of national unity and a member of cabinet in Mandela's time. So I wish that we can reach a decision that instead of making noise about coalition, let us talk about government of national unity, a government which would include even the ANC, because you still need that institutional memory they have and what they have been doing. So I don't have a problem working with any political party in South Africa.
Well, that's a fair statement, a fair assessment. In fact, that was one of the key tenets of the multi-party charter, is their agreement to work together to unseat the ANC. And based on the position you just said, that I wouldn't have worked out well. That does explain why the UDM wasn't part of that at that stage. But you are open to working with other parties, which is good to hear. Now, the UDM today is, unfortunately, the last election, much smaller than it had been in the past. Do you think that you'll see a significant increase in your numbers this time? Those who support the UDM, I'm sure, are hoping for a much bigger turnout in voters this time around.
Well, given that we have been vindicated on our themes all along, we have been occupying the crease, if I can use the language of cricket. And during that time, we think we've batted very well. We've hit them for 6s and 4s. It was the UDM which, for instance, right at the beginning said that the legislation for floor crossing must go, it is corrupt. Today, it is no longer in our statute books. It was the UDM again which led when we said that we need party funding legislation so that we know who is funding who. It was the UDM again which showed the door to the former chairperson of the Electoral Commission in South Africa. It was the UDM again which called for the Commission of Inquiry to be instituted to investigate the Public Investment Corporation, where the pension monies of South Africans were being misused. Yes, again, we have recently stopped the sale of SAA by 5% by 51 rands by Minister Gordhan and Cyril Ramaphosa. That deal is off. Yes, recently again, we won a court case where we said you cannot load shed or do a load shedding in hospitals, in police stations, and schools. We won that case. And of course, it was the UDM which won a case against the Speaker, where we said if we can vote secretly when we elect a president, why can't we vote secretly if we have a vote of no confidence against him or her? And we won that case. And lastly, today we do not have a Speaker of House in Parliament because of the UDM again. So the voters, at least if they are fair, they should be saying, let's reward this small party. It has been punching above its weight.
Well, I'd have to say you are punching above your weight, and I will say that the media do a very poor job of pointing out those court victories that you've had. I have noted them, and but they come and go, and the media really don't pay much attention to it. I think that some of those court cases are critically important to transparency and to good governance in South Africa, and I congratulate the UDM on that. Hey, folks, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa on the UDM Africa channel. My guest tonight is none other than Major General Bantu Holomisa, the president of the United Democratic Party, United Democratic Party, UDM, and we're talking about South Africa's election on May 29th. Now, there has been, General Holomisa, there has been a actor who's entered the stage here that's kind of upset the apple cart. They came on the scene, made a big noise, and now they seem to be imploding. As I watch Jabulani Khumalo suspend Jacob Zuma after Jacob Zuma kicked out Jabulani Khumalo. Look, I don't mean to laugh, but in some ways it's a comedy of error what's going on with the MK party. It appears that its biggest impact, at least from the outside looking in, has been in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng, but especially in KZN, where they are hiving support of former ANC voters and some IFP supporters. I don't know that's having an impact on your party. Any thoughts on the MK party and what's happening with it as it faces a plethora of court cases, including one right now before the Constitutional Court to determine under Section 47 of the Constitution that Jacob Zuma is ineligible to serve in Parliament. And if he can't serve in Parliament, he cannot be elected president. But of course, the voters don't elect the president. You're elected by Parliament. So any thoughts on MK and all that noise that's going on right now? And is it having any impact on your growth as a party?
Let me start with the latter. I don't think it will have any impact on the growth of the UDM. What we are witnessing there is a split of the ANC. And they should be doing a prognosis as to what were the circumstances which led to that. So, but I don't think they have a time to look into that. I see now that some political dinosaurs are being called to come and campaign for the ANC. So I'm sure they are coming back precisely because they wouldn't like to see ANC losing whilst they are still alive. They are coming merely to make sure that their tracks would be covered. So as far as the MK is concerned, I hold no brief for Zuma, but I think it's a good thing to strengthen the checks and balances in our system because they are going to chow some parts of the ANC's electorate. And we appreciate that. That would reduce at least that 50% to a lower level so that they can wake up a little bit.
Well, this is the part where I sort of crow about my predictions, and we'll see how it comes out. So you can hold me to it. I know that's not a focus for you, General, but we'll see if it comes true. After the municipal elections in November of 2021, I predicted at that time, not knowing about the degree of load shedding that was coming in the subsequent time after that election, especially last year, I predicted that the ANC would not garner more than 42% of the electorate in a free and fair election, and likely as low as 38%, and I was praying they would go down to 33%. Now, I'm not unbiased. I see the ANC as not a good thing for South Africans, so I'll be honest about that. But my prediction was 38 to 42%. According to the Brent Hurst poll, the Ipsos poll, and a lot of expectations, they're actually in that range right now. This must be a real comeuppance for the African National Congress, who likes to tell everyone that they, and they alone, ended apartheid. They brought liberation for South Africans. No one else was involved, just them. I mean, those aren't their words, but that's what they imply to folks. bringing them down below 50%, if anything, ought to at least wake them up to just how disenchanted people in South Africa are with their governance and service delivery.
Personally, I don't think that would be possible to below 30. No. I think, you see, the social security program of the ANC is still being regarded as one of the best in the continent. And the voters, especially the poor of the poorest, will not easily move away from a party which has been sustaining them through those grants. So they are going to play a meaningful role. But the ANC itself will have to accept if indeed they are not going to be in power. This is another area where we would have to make sure that the law enforcement agencies must make sure that there will be no resistance of change of power or transfer of power. But I'm in the opposition benches. I don't want to be too excited about these surveys. Sometimes they are not accurate. But Ipsos, he has been one of the highly respected institutions which has predicted the results properly. I'm sure that's why the ANC, as I said, have even gone to call all those political dinosaurs who have messed up in the beginning to come back and campaign for them.
Well, of course, you're not mentioning names, but I have been covering the campaigning of Tokyo Sexwale and Thabo Mbeki out on the trail for the ANC. If they could dig up Madiba, they probably would, just to get out there and get some sympathy for the party. No, I think maybe misheard. I'd said 42 and 38%. I was hoping they'd go lower, but 42 to 38. The Ipsos poll puts them at 40% right now, but a lot can change between that poll in April and May 29th. So we can't hang our hat on that, good or bad, whether the ANC is going to be there. But I should think that anything below 50% really ought to wake up some of the senior leadership in the ANC who seem to be sleepwalking through events of the past 4 or 5 years, as if they're just entitled to govern whether they govern well or not. I mean, I should think that would bother South Africans. I saw in the Imbizo that took place in Northern Cape a few days ago, before they announced Cyril Ramaphosa coming out, they said, listen, now, these are people they took food parcels to and gave them food parcels. They claimed it had nothing to do with the election. It's just because we're having an Imbizo. It's nothing to do with the election. So they gave them food parcels and they said, listen, it's up to you. The president gets his last paycheck on May 15th. And if you don't get out and get the ANC back in power, he won't get a paycheck on June 15th. And my thought to that is, do you really take South African voters to be that stupid? And are you that inconsiderate? I mean, honestly, why would I care about a person worth over 200 million US dollars, whether he gets a paycheck next month? I care about whether I have electricity and water and my kids are safe going to school and they get a proper education and things like that. It really seems to me in so many ways, now you talk about grants, we'll get back to that, in so many ways that much of the leadership of the ANC is tone deaf to what is happening around them. Or they just zip around in their blue light escorts and forget about the average South African.
Well, it's unfortunate that the arrogance of power in them have led them to not applying the grey matter, which they got it from God. Because that statement is, you are actually saying you are undermining the people that they don't pay. And also the other people will be asking questions. Is that the reason why you're not creating jobs for us? Because once we are at work, we are going to be independent thinkers. Now you are holding us at ransom. You give us food, which comes only on the eve of election. After 5 years, we are starving. So yes, they undermine the intelligence of South Africans in a big way. I hope they will be punished this time for that.
Well, my hope is the same, and that people punish them at the ballot box like they should be punished. Now, you mentioned grants, and this is something I criticize South Africa's opposition parties for frequently. Yes, the ANC can take credit for grant programs, but many parties voted to support those grants in national budgets in Parliament. And that money doesn't come from the ANC. They have convinced many South Africans that without the ANC, there'll be no grants. But not any party I'm aware of is calling for the elimination of grants. In fact, the DA is calling for increases in several grants, among others. The grants come from Parliament, and they're executed by a government, and they're paid for by taxpayers and people who loan money to South Africa, not from the ANC. The ANC can't pay its own staff. The 102 million rand judgment that they magically came up with recently in November, and then the 20 million they spent on their birthday celebration, the ANC has no money. So I think that opposition parties, in my view, and you're a leader of an opposition party, really need to convince South Africans that the money comes from taxpayers and that the grants aren't going anywhere. They'll continue. Do you agree or disagree with that sentiment?
Oh, we have been telling the people. I even say to them, when I was head of Transkei government, I didn't come to the government offices carrying the bags of money. I utilize your taxes and pay back your grants. The grants are here to stay. But what I'm worried about is the economic performance of South Africa. We don't seem to have find a consensus. And instead, you will find we have been consumers. And the day the National Treasury says there is no money to pay grants, then we will be in trouble. So what is needed, therefore, is to have a balancing act. Whilst we pay grants this side, but there must be responsibility and make sure that we get correct ingredients so that we can bake that cake and so that we can divide it for our population. It's worse now because everybody comes to South Africa all over the world. Others are coming legal, others are coming illegally. So that is draining our resources. So I hope, in fact, that's what in our manifesto, if you noticed, I called for a national dialogue, which must not only sit for a weekend, but it must be a dialogue which would stretch to 18 months to 24 months, where we look at the journey we've traveled collectively and what have we where did we make mistakes and how to fix them. Part of that is the economy of South Africa. We cannot allow the ruling party to come up with their own macroeconomic policy and then the very alliance partners, SACP and COSATU, and they shoot it down. So we need a broader team of South Africans to say, where are we heading to? What should we do about the crime? What should we do about the education? What kind of pillars of our educations do we need to have? Let's have a collective on this.
Well, that's an interesting approach. Also, I noticed in your manifesto, there's an allusion, a discussion about local government interaction with the informal sector. Now, a lot of times GDP across Africa is way underestimated, way projected because the informal economy is frequently not included. And in many countries, particularly I used to live in West Africa, that's 75% of economic activity or more is in the informal economy. Now, the figure isn't that high in South Africa. It's probably 35% of the economy, maybe a little bit more. But by not including the informal hawkers and traders and the unlicensed spas and tuck shops and things like that, you exclude a big portion of the economy from taxation, from participation, from government services. You've addressed that. Local government becoming engaged with, now that's my words, you can correct me, local government becoming engaged with the informal sector. I think that's a real angle that most political parties have completely ignored, and one that South Africans should take a look at is looking at the informal sector and trying to bring it into the formal sector and do that at the local government level. Did I get correct what you guys are talking about?
Yes, you are spot on. In fact, if you look at the grants which are being paid, on the day of paying those grants, you will find that those who are given this grant, they go to these spaza shops. And who runs the spaza shops? mainly is run by people from Pakistan. And then there is no proof that they are doing banking here or even pay taxes. So we feel that the local government needs to close ranks and work with those informal businesses and try and regulate, because sometimes they even violate the bylaws. And there's a lot which they can do to empower them. At the same time, the national government should clearly distinguish its role on supporting the small businesses, especially when it comes to infrastructure development. Because if I want to open a shop or a business and I'm in the remote areas, the rural areas, and I don't have access to internet, that means government must roll out the broadband so that I can have Wi-Fi facilities and so on.
Well, there is one thing that really here that should get people's attention in your manifesto. Let me read this so I don't get it incorrect. So it says, use the Public Investment Corporation and Industrial Development Corporation to drive growth, not elite wealth creation and corruption. Now, again, I stand subject to correction, or seat subject to correction, but that appears to me to be kind of a dig on what has happened under BEE. BEE has created a small coterie of incredibly wealthy people, and that money has not gotten to most South Africans, particularly black South Africans. So is that where you're going with that? You're concerned about how only a small group of people have profited from that effort?
We are concerned, especially after the Commission of Inquiry by Judge Mpati, which showed or vindicated the UDM's position that the PIC was used as a piggy bank for the comrades in corruption who wanted to be involved in business. The bad thing is that they are not servicing those loans. Both the listed and unlisted companies are owing the PIC big monies. Yet if that the government had created a national fund to fund their BE schemes, but not to put the pensions monies at risk, that would have been the best. The best approach would be for the asset management companies to compete as to where will they invest the pensions of the people. But this thing of putting them under the control of government was a misuse of power, and they have also been used to bail out the SOEs, which have collapsed. The question is, when will those monies be paid back?
Well, I think the answer is never. Unfortunately, that's the sad part. So one of the big contentions in South Africa has been the issue of land, of course. And from 1995 to 1999, the land claims process was opened up. There were approximately 75,000 land claims. Now, the one thing that I think was appropriate about it is that they said 1910 because South Africa didn't exist before then. So we're going back to the Union of South Africa Act. That was a negotiated codation afterwards. And those 75,000 claims didn't have to be filed by someone who's dispossessed. It could have been filed by their offspring, their grandchildren. If your grandfather had his land taken, say in District 6 or farmland, Eastern Cape, you could make an application. Now, 74,000 of those claims were resolved, most financially. People took the money rather than fight for the land. But land remains a contentious issue in South Africa, particularly after Zuma opened up another window and 141,000 additional claims were filed, many of them duplicative and some of them erroneous or false. But land is an issue. Now, I'm reading your manifesto, and it says here some things that I've talked about. I wrote an article in 2018 that talked about land, who wants land, who should get land, and where the real claims are at. So let me read what you have here from your manifesto. You propose an economic indaba focused on land. A proposed economic endowment focused on land does not favor a free-for-all land grabs and evictions. In other words, an orderly process to talk about land is what I'm inferring there. The Indaba should determine who will be affected and how, what will impact food security and economic stability, options for rapid urbanization, the implication of urban land sales to foreigners, and how to speed up Title D transfers. In fact, that's one of the ways the government has kept people impoverished, in my view, billions of rand of dead capital, because RDP houses, they don't issue title to the occupants. So they don't have any capital that they can use to borrow money to get a car, to get to work, or to fund a spas or a tuck shop or something like that. So it looks like you have a rational approach to discuss land, not the nonsense that we see from so many political parties today. Any comments, or tell me what I got wrong about that?
Well, the issue of land is a very contentious one, as you said, correctly put it, in South Africa. But I always remind people that in the conflict between black and white South Africans, militarily speaking, there was no winner. And the leaders then decided to sit around the table. And I think we still have time to once more, especially in the proposed national dialogue, that the issue of land, the economy and land and property should be high on the agenda. And because I don't think we finished this during negotiations, precisely because we pressed panic buttons after Chris Wyatt was assassinated. We merely demanded a date for elections. But fortunately, our constitution allowed us or encouraged us that we should address these issues. So all what I can say is that the land claims and compensation, yes, were started well until the corruption embarrassed us. Where if, for instance, you sell a plot for 10 million, then the comrades are going to say, no, sell it by 25 million, then you give me the rest. Unfortunately, that has discredited the issue of addressing land problem in South Africa. But as I say, it's not going to need or be a problem of one political party. All South Africans must sit around the table and find a solution.
Well, I would agree with you 100% on that. And also, I don't think the ANC has taken the whole process seriously over the past 2 decades. Maybe early on there was a serious effort, but the past 2 decades, there's virtually no money allocated for land acquisition. Most land that's acquired by the government isn't redistributed. There's no extension services for aspiring farmers in particular. And also, there's, I think, some disingenuous discussion about this by some of the political actors in South Africa, talking about land as if we're talking about mostly farmland. There is farmland, that's an issue. And there are some unresolved claims there, absolutely 100%. But much of this is people who were dispossessed of peri-urban and urban land, or people were just looking for a place to live in, a home. And again, I think that if we did the title transfer deed and stopped making people wards of the state, then that would free up a lot of capital and help people out. Now, you also have in your manifesto an allusion to something that I have not heard any political parties talk about. Now, I'll admit that may be because I haven't been looking for it, but you talk about, from the healthcare sector, addressing substance abuse. And that is something we don't hear much of, but that is a very real problem around the world. But in South Africa in particular, you've got some issues with substance abuse and how that affects social dynamics, relations between men and women, family relations, single parent families, and in crime. Why the focus on substance abuse? Is it something that's near and dear to your heart, or something your party has recognized as a social ill that must be addressed?
Unfortunately for us, I worry about the generation of today, where some of these kids have dropped out of school because of this. The drugs and other related matters. I think there is a need, for instance, now to have centers where we have to take these kids and try and tell them that, look, this is not the way to live. So you are going to be here, and then we will look after you, and then after that you get jobs and so on. And I'm just thinking about a practical and pragmatic approach, because it's embarrassing to our country. These kids, they beat their parents, they rob their parents because of this substance abuse, drugs they're using. I can't hear you now.
Sorry, that's my mistake. That's why you can't hear me. Thank you. There's one other area I have to succumb to the ravages of age here. And in the past 6 months, I started wearing reading glasses, particularly for text that's this small. You can't see it there. There it is. It's so tiny. So anyway, but for this tiny text, I wanted to cover this because this is also something else that other people don't cover in their manifestos for the most part. I, of course, have experience with traditional leaders, having lived in Botswana. We have Kosi, the Dikosi, and the local Nkosi. So you have traditional leaders and the role they play in society, and that's in Tswana society, in Setswana. So this is a factor all over South Africa. And here's some comments from your manifesto about traditional leaders. Consider how to imbue tremendous respect and authority for traditional leaders. They have been belittled and undermined. And revisit that for millions of South Africans, traditional leaders are authority figures, undisputed leaders and decision makers, and custodians of culture, traditions, and values. They are the closest form of government that many of our people know. And in fact, is it fair to make the statement, if I make this statement unilaterally, that perhaps one of the problems in South Africa has been the lack of respect for traditional leaders and their role in local communities, particularly at safeguarding culture and traditions and values? Is that a fair statement? It sounds like that's the direction you're headed.
Yes, the traditional institutions or traditional leaders have been undermined in a big way. And they have been complaining without the ruling party listening. Even when it comes to the drafting of the legislation, sometimes you will find that the people who are making laws for the country are the lobbyists who have access to internet and laptops. But when it comes to the chiefs, traditional leaders, and the communities out there, all what they are going to be told is that there is this law and so on. I think we need to involve the traditional leaders, especially that the discipline has broken down completely in the rural areas. Sometimes this lack of discipline, we always ascribe it to the people who are living in the townships in the past. But now you see some signs that the youth in the rural areas are not learning what should happen. It is for this reason that even the circumcision period, where you see a number of deaths, is precisely because lack of discipline by those who are looking after those kids. You can't bring liquor, for instance, in an environment where you have these children in the circumcision school. But breakdown of discipline, which used to be enforced by the traditional leaders, the development of the rural areas, you wouldn't do it in the past without consulting the traditional leaders. And the old Imbizos and Indabas were always called to in the king's scroll or chief's scroll. Today you see people in the open space, and then the councillor just calls a meeting. And then this councillor is not going to be here after 5 years. You can have another council. But people, when they have problems, they never say, call a councillor. They will say, where's chief? Where is headman so-and-so? So which means the people still recognize those institutions.
It's ironic that this is a problem area for South Africa, given that traditional leadership is enshrined in the Constitution. It's supposed to be something that's there. But what we've often seen is as I believe, and this is my view, that it's approached incorrectly. We see government favoring certain leaders at the expense of those in general. It's really, and wherever you come from in South Africa, this is part and parcel of South Africa. Maybe not all cultures in South Africa have this tradition, but it is prevalent in much of South Africa. And since it's in the Constitution, it really is something that should be addressed. And look, I agree with this concept that these folks ought to be empowered and ought to be respected, because if you disrespect, because we're typically talking about graybeards, elders, if you disrespect your elders, you have no respect for the elderly, then your respect for the value and sanctity of life really falls off the charts. And it may explain why we've seen so much rampant alcoholism, why we've seen such gender-based violence, and also these criminality that's just rampant in South Africa. Kidnappings, carjackings, theft, home invasions. It's so disheartening because most South Africans aren't like that. But there is a segment of society that gets away with this, and I think that your approach may actually have a positive impact on addressing that.
Yes, the issue of traditional leaders is catered for in our constitution. However, I think we have failed as a country to develop a proper legislation to deal with that institution. And it's not late. And the beauty about it is that the sons of the chiefs who are running those institutions today are not like the old chiefs. These now are well-educated kids. Some are advocates in courts. So I hope that sooner or later we will find a solution to restore dignity for those institutions.
Well, Bantu Holomisa, Major General Bantu Holomisa, retired, as I am retired from military service, but a serving member of parliament and the president of the United Democratic Movement. What I'm going to do is give you a few moments here, sir. Your chance to make your pitch to potential UDM voters, get people to come out and vote for UDM, pull that lever. It's a little confusing. There's 3 ballots. You've got 3 ballots. You've got to pick a national, a regional, and then the provincial. But nonetheless, each voter gets 3 ballots. And if they want to make their mark for the UDM, make your pitch right now. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, to the voters of South Africa, when you hear about the name UDM, you know that this is the only party which has no skeletons. This is the only party which has been calling for the accountability to be improved. This is the only party which has proved beyond reasonable doubt in many cases that we are not faking. We are real when we say, stop that, stop that. We have been vindicated on a number of occasions. And earlier on in my introduction, I did list the victories of the United Democratic Movement. So we are for a country which is united, and we hope that come elections, we will pursue this program of establishing or starting a national dialogue to look into the problems of South Africa and also come up with some suggestions on how to move forward. We cannot lose the good start with which Mandela and others started. We need to recapture the lost ground and do so quickly too.
Well, I think that's spot on. We need to recapture the lost ground and do so quickly. Those are great thoughts, General Holomisa. Sir, it's a pleasure. It's been a year since we had a conversation like this, but we have met in person in the in-between time. I am awaiting my passport agency to get off their bum and return my passport, which was due to expire in June. So it's been stuck in the bureaucracy for several weeks there. Hopefully, I'll get it back in time to book a flight and make it there for the elections. If not, I'll be coming after the elections and looking at the aftermath. But I think that May 29th is going to be a very exciting day across South Africa. And if I do get back there, I will be in one of 3 places, most likely, either in the Western Cape, in Nelson Mandela Bay, or in Pretoria on election day. So I'm hoping to get back there. I want to offer my best wishes and best of luck to you and your party. If you can have your personal assistant or somebody that if you've got other members of the party you'd like me to interview over the next couple weeks, I'd be happy to do that and share their candidacy and what their thoughts are. But I want to say, Ke Alaboa, bye-bye, Donkey. Thank you so much for your time, sir. It's always a pleasure.
Bye, Donkey. Thank you. Salute.
All right, colleagues saluting. All right, I'll let General Holomisa drop off, and then I'll wrap up the program, folks. Major General Bantu Holomisa, the president of the United Democratic Movement and a member of parliament in South Africa. And it looks like he's having a little trouble there getting out, so I'll get him out of there. Okay, there you go. All right, thank you all for tuning. I do appreciate it. Second broadcast of the day, and this was an interview with the president of the UDM. Now, I didn't get a chance to get to many questions in the chat. My apologies for that, but I did have a number of pre-existing questions I want to get to. Some issues that other parties aren't talking about, like traditional leaders, the issue of land, other parties aren't really talking about, and even the corruption, the Zondo Commission, not really high on the chart. People just say corruption in general, but the UDM is specifically focused on the output of the Zondo Commission, which is being largely ignored in South Africa. Thank you. you for your time, folks. I do appreciate it. And once again, my thanks to General Holomisa and to the UDM for their time. We are trying to bring you as many views and as many political parties and candidates as we can in the build up to the 29 May elections. And whatever the case is, if you're a South African, hopefully you're registered to vote. And I encourage you, I exhort you to go to the polls and vote on May 29th. Or if you're on a special election day because of your circumstances, please go vote. The most important thing is to vote and make your mark for a political party. And thank you so much. And that's going to be it, folks. We're going to wrap it up here, and we'll catch you next time right here on the program. Thanks for your time. Appreciate you all being here. Be sure to hit that like button, and that doesn't cost you anything but a moment of your time. We do appreciate that very much. Thanks a lot, everybody. Catch you next time right here on Chris Wyatt Africa. Cheers.